একটা প্রশ্ন আছে, একই প্রশ্ন যখন আমরা এই করতাম, বাট নিজে করলে তো ভালো লাগে, ঠিক না? আর Good afternoon.
It used to be called Chilean.
Oh yes.
To encourage subcontinental
Volunteer. Great. Anyway, thank you. Thank you very much.
Glass.
Ibrahim, tadi ini. Yes.
To start.
Hello everyone, Assalamualaikum. Welcome to this London Bangla Press Club. Today's special guest, His Excellency. I'm welcoming you also everyone, and I have already sent the just straightforward question answer session.
London Bangla Press Club to gather all the journalists who work here better, to train them and to help them for us. I'm really delighted that Secretary running this club for 25 years and
was additional director in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the FCO at London. Before joining in the FCO,
Really looking forward to receiving and answering your questions. I'll just say very briefly, I think the introduction has said exactly who I am. I've been the British High Commissioner in Dhaka for the last just over 3 months. I arrived in March. I had a very intense 3-month initial introduction to Bangladesh, including lots of visiting to Sylhet and Cox's Bazar and Rangpur and other places. And then I came back for some years in Bangladesh. You see an economy that's grown by 6 to 8% for a decade. You see an economy that's due to grow by 8% this year. You see institutions. There are lots of problems with governance in Bangladesh, but compared with other places where I've worked, you see institutions that know what they want to do, a real sense of national vision and a real sense of national optimism about the future of Bangladesh. And you see a country that is in the process of graduating over the next 3 or 4 years from least developed country to middle-income country status. And I think that transition is a tremendously significant moment in the life of a country which started in very difficult circumstances in 1971 and has been in many ways one of the best examples anywhere in the world of how the basics of development can be got right. So you look at life expectancy, all the key indicators around sustainable development look very positive for Bangladesh. You see an economy that's growing. You see plenty of challenges, but you see a real sense of a country that is on the up and will be playing an increasingly important role in regional and global affairs over the next over the coming decades. So it's if you look at the world from Dhaka, you obviously have 2 massive regional superpowers. So Bangladesh obviously has a very close relationship with India. I mean, the geographical facts make that necessary. But I think, as always with a relationship between 2 partners where there is an asymmetry, where one partner is much bigger than the other partner, I think sometimes it's a relationship that can seem a little strained. So it's very interesting. Obviously, the relationship with India is always going to be extremely important, but it's one where I sense sometimes that it's a relationship that people at the Dhaka end find more difficult than they might hope. And if you look at the relationship with China, there is obviously huge Chinese interest right throughout the region. But what you see in Dhaka is a little bit of wariness about what Chinese influence actually means. And people in Dhaka, I think, sometimes look at some of the things that China has done elsewhere in the region, and they're a bit wary about falling into some of the traps around very large amounts of money, infrastructure projects, and those very strongly represented 100,000 strong Bangladeshi, which date back through and beyond. So I think there's a really good opportunity to try and refresh the partnership that I mentioned over the 50th anniversary. So I think the 50th anniversary is going to be a very good way for us to renew the partnership for a new generation. It's obviously a huge advantage dealing with 1971 that we are still dealing with people who were active players at the time of the events of 71, but clearly that generation will eventually move on from the stage, and I think it's very important that we renew and refresh the relationship for people who weren't direct participants that is the conference that will be taking place in London next month on media freedom. We've been encouraging senior Bangladeshi representation, but I think you as journalists will know better than anyone that there are times when the media in Bangladesh feels quite beleaguered. Journalists in Bangladesh feel quite a lot of pressure from different places in all sorts of different ways, and I think media freedom is absolutely critical to the functioning of a democracy, and I'm very much hoping that the Bangladeshi participation in the Global Media Freedom Conference that Jeremy Hunt and his Canadian opposite number, Christia Freeland, are hosting in London next month will help to just create a bit more space for journalists in Bangladesh to do their jobs, because what the journalists directly tell us is that they often feel under quite a lot of pressure, and that pressure is obviously unhelpful to the functioning of a democracy. But there are sort of wider points we'll be making around the role of the opposition, the ability of the opposition to function in Parliament, and those are comments and discussions that we'll be having right across the political scene in Bangladesh, not aiming with any one party, but trying to make sure that our view that a democratic future is very much the most stable and secure future for Bangladesh is one that we will be promoting across the board. Going problem for Bangladesh, there were 350,000 people in Cox's Bazar. There are now 1 million people in the environment around Cox's Bazar. And what we need to do is to try and make sure that those people are properly are given the opportunity to return to Myanmar in conditions that are voluntary, safe and dignified. And we'll be working with the Bangladeshi government to try and support that going forward.
Very first question we received from the Nazrul Islam Bashar.
Migration, I mean, yes, I think the problem, I think what we need to be clear with people is that the days when relatively low-skilled people could expect to come from Bangladesh to the UK are over. The UK, as we evolve our migration policy after Brexit, will be, we'll be looking for skilled workers with something to contribute, and obviously we very much hope that many of those people will be from Bangladesh. But I think it's, the days when people with relatively limited skills can come and work in the restaurant industry or elsewhere, those days are gone. And I'd be very, we can certainly look at ways of making sure that those messages are properly put out. And I know that there is a wider, there's a lot of coverage in the Bangladeshi media every day in Bangladesh of people who are abused, not just in terms of trying to come to the UK. Yeah, this is a huge industry, and there are terrible stories, effectively, of modern slavery, where people who are sort of signed up to go to places like to Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or whatever, are being very badly abused. Yeah, and I would certainly be very happy to look at things that we as a High Commission can do to stop any of that sort of abuse.
We have seen that the global media has been trying to portray Bangladesh as the one-party state. So I'd like to hear you comment about it, number one. Number two is Tariq Rahman and Chaudhry Moinuddin, they have been convicted in Bangladesh. So Bangladesh government has been trying to say that they are taking initiative to take them back. So what is the policy from the British government in relation to that repatriation?
Okay. Clearly, the point I would make is that if you look at the election results, when you have one party winning 96% of the seats in Parliament, then obviously there is, shall we say, a bit of an asymmetry in the relations between the two parties. We were pleased. I think it's positive that the BNP have now taken their seats in Parliament. Obviously, the BNP is quite small as a presence in Parliament, but I hope that they will nonetheless be able to do the thing, and will be allowed to do the things that opposition parties are meant to do in a parliamentary system, which is to hold the government to account, to be constructively critical, to serve as a loyal opposition. Because otherwise the risk is, I think, that you could see some of the features of a one-party state starting to appear in Bangladesh, and those features often include in other places, corruption, people join parties for the wrong reasons. It means that people who have legitimate political aspirations don't have a way of pursuing them, and I think there's lots of danger in that. So we've made very clear in public, and I've said it myself in meetings with lots of people in Bangladesh, that we think that it's very important that the opposition party is allowed to do its job. And I think that is the best defence for Bangladesh against the thought, and I can see why some people might have this thought after the elections, that Bangladesh might be heading in a one-party state direction, because I don't think that would be a positive thing for the country in the longer term. On the second point, we don't comment on individual cases, so I can't address specific issues around the two people that you mentioned. What I can say is that the government has from time to time made efforts to have them returned. As you will know, as people living in the UK, those decisions are not taken by the government, those decisions are taken by the courts. And so, obviously, if the cases were being pursued by the government, there would be the opportunity for them to be considered both the rights of the individuals and the strength of the case for deportation will be looked at by the courts, not by the government.
Statement that there will be a big conference organized by UK and the Canadian government on media freedom, global media freedom, not particularly. But the British government has been insisting on improving conditions in Bangladesh for the free media.
We've made all this very clear in public. Mr. Field, who is our Asia Minister, was very clear about our concerns about the election. He made a statement straight afterwards, and he made the same thing. He did two things. When he was in Bangladesh in April, he came for a visit to Dhaka, despite all the parliamentary commitments he had here. I was very grateful he came, because he did two things when he was there. The first was he had quite a candid conversation with the Prime Minister about these issues, with Honourable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, so we have put our views on record through that. And he also made a speech, which is, I'm sure, still on the Foreign Office website and bears reading, where he set out the sort of conditions that need to exist for democracy to flourish. And among them that he, absolutely stressed was the importance of media freedom. So, we have made clear our views, and I think the conference is a really good opportunity to, stress that this is part of a global priority for us. And I think, again for Bangladesh, it's rather like there are two statistics on Bangladesh which are frustrating. One is that Bangladesh comes 176th in the ease of doing business rankings globally, and that's unfortunate because one feels that the potential of the country could be so much more easily fulfilled if it was easier for foreign investors to come in and do business. But the other one, which is more relevant to this, is that Bangladesh currently rates 150th in the Reporters Without Borders global survey. And that, again, that is a bad place, because one of the things I've been very struck by since I arrived in Bangladesh is the extraordinarily strong sort of tradition of debate in Bengali culture. And I think it's a real tragedy if that tradition of debate and argument and discussion gets sort of stifled by some of the pressures that journalists tell us they feel under when they are doing their job. So I hope that the fact that we're promoting this globally will be an opportunity for us to make the same case and for the same case to be heard in the specific circumstances of Bangladesh. I would note, I think, I am struck, having said all that, there are a lot of newspapers in Bangladesh. Clearly there is pressure on the people who print them, but nonetheless there is challenging stories are still published. And the Prime Minister, when we've discussed this with her, always points to the fact that she says, quite frankly criticised on sort of television talk shows, and that the 700 newspapers that are published in Bangladesh are not all aligned in one direction necessarily. So I think there's sort of something to work with, but I think it's very important that we help journalists in Bangladesh to address the pressures that they feel themselves under. And I hope just quickly...
Bangladesh and Venezuela situation. So I think you'll be comfortable to come for... I think that is okay. So this is what happened in Bangladesh, and after two first year election, and definitely under question of all aspects, international community called for independent probe, and including United Nations, White House, federal government, and European Union. And nothing happened because after 6 months, the new group, nothing was started. And as a diplomatic mission, as a serious diplomatic, because we are Bangladesh is the shadow of Westminster, practicing Westminster democracy. So I have opposite question. There is some innovation in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh government is claiming as a role model in different perspectives, different sectors. And according out of that, one is midnight election.
One is
midnight election. Midnight election
before
to save money, to save money, blood, and life. So it is midnight election. Before the morning election is completed. So would you interested to import it as a diplomatic head in the United Kingdom, the same type of election as a role model? I'm serious. Journalism is under threat in Bangladesh because
Digital Security Act have been British, and we have immediately sought consular access and been given consular access because that's our entitlement under the Vienna Convention. But I think there's a wider point, because it's when people are not British, so we don't have that direct consular viewpoint. Nonetheless, we have raised, I have raised personally already some of these cases, some of the more concerning cases under the Digital Security Act with people like the Law Minister. So, for example, there was this was a particularly, we thought, odd case where the head of FIFA, who was a woman in Bangladesh, made the off-the-cuff remark that the Prime Minister appeared to prefer cricket to football, and she was arrested, and we immediately raised that case along with others in the international community with the law minister, and she was released very soon afterwards. And we've been making the case to the law minister, to the people in the Prime Minister's office, to relevant people throughout Bangladesh, that these sorts of cases are very bad for Bangladesh's democratic reputation, and that it would be much better for Bangladesh as it matures as an economy if it can also be seen to be maturing as a democracy. And this sort of very, in some cases what could be seen as quite heavy-handed approaches to people using a very all-encompassing or potentially all-encompassing piece of legislation like the Digital Security Act is not, this is not a positive way to encourage the country to mature as an economy and mature as a democracy. So we are making clear, even when we don't have a direct consul in Locus, that we have political concerns about these cases, and we are raising them. And I hope that some of those arguments are sinking in. Certainly in private, people acknowledge the damage that some of these things are doing, even if they don't then feel able to do the same thing in public.
What
is that there wasn't really an international monitoring of the election. So in other places where I've been, where there have been elections where you have international monitoring, it's easier then to sort of, to make clear concerns about the results. And because there wasn't an international mission on which a probe could be based, I don't think we have that option this time round. But what we have done, as I said, is make very clear in public straight after the election and in subsequent political context our concerns about the way in which the election was carried out, and about the way that, as we were saying earlier, some of this begins to look quite one-party state in a way that we think is potentially quite worrying.
Very much allowing you. One of my questions already asked, but I wanted to.
I think visa related.
It's visa related, but it's one of the questions you already answered. But I just wanted to make sure the relevant question regarding the Tariq Rahman. So the Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh already mentioned that they already applied for extradition process. I just wanted to make sure that have you received that extradition process the Bangladesh government started with the British government, or you haven't received any application or any request from the Bangladesh government, yes or no?
Well, we respect the comment on individual cases.
So next question about the in your speech you have mentioned you wanted to try to relationship and build the branding of Bangladesh and in UK 50 years of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But in your travel advice in your Foreign Commonwealth website, I'm coming to the visa later because it is related. It means several people were killed in many more injured 3rd of June in a train drilling near the Boromchal station in Maulavi Bazar. One attention, and another attention, Foreign Commonwealth Office advised against all but essential travel to Chittagong hill tracks. This is the first sentence. Mm-hmm. So if any traveler, any tourist wanted to visit Bangladesh, it will affect them not to visit Bangladesh. But at the very end, in your footnote, you mention, just wanted to give you accurate information. 150,000 British nationals visit Bangladesh every year. Most visits are trouble-free. So this is the main important thing. Last few years, in every year 150 British nationals traveling Bangladesh, nothing happened. But your first sentence, mentioning there is a problem in Bangladesh in Chittagong hill tracks. So can you rephrase all of your information then to not to distract the British traveler to travel Bangladesh? It may create problem and fear inside the travelers. So you can make a footnote rather giving a topic sentence like this. So this is another fear about the travelers. I had a long conversation with the travel agent in Bangladesh. They mentioned it very clearly. This travel advice is problematic for the British travelers. One question. And another question, recently visa algorithm system. 10,000 application applied for to visit UK to watch the World Cup cricket match. But most of the genuine fans are not allowing United Kingdom to enter because of the visa algorithm system. They just randomly picked out. But so how a visa algorithm system will make sure genuine traveler to visit in United Kingdom?
Is to alert people to the risks that they may face when they travel. It's not designed to be an advertisement for the country that people are thinking of travelling to. And if you look at the travel, compare the Bangladesh travel advice with travel advice in lots of other parts of the region, I think you'll see that everywhere
No, you didn't.
are absolutely front and centre of our travel advice on Sri Lanka. And the point of travel advice is to alert people to the potential hazards that they face. And we deliberately, I mean, I did a review of travel advice in the Foreign Office some years ago, and the point is to make it as sort of blunt and memorable as possible, because we want people to be informed. And the very fact that, you know, we go on to mention that a large number of British people go to Bangladesh every year, you know, we try and make it balanced, but it's very important that, in a sense, with travel advice, you get the bad news up front. And I think the key thing about the travel advice for Bangladesh is that the vast majority of the country is green. So green means, you know, go there, take precautions, but entirely free to go there. And if you compare that with lots of other countries around the world, then you'll see that actually, you know, that is quite encouraging actually relative to other places, because the point of the advice is to make people aware of the potential hazards. And clearly in Bangladesh, you know, we wouldn't want large numbers of people going to the Chittagong Hill tracks, beautiful though they are, because clearly there are still acts of violence taking place there. And on the trains, I mean, it is a fact that trains in Bangladesh have a slightly mixed safety record, so we again want people to sort of think about the risks that they may be taking. So travel advice, I do think it's fair. I mean, it is meant, as I said, to be clear about the risks and not meant to be sort of promoting a particular destination. And I think, as I said, the thing to do is compare what it says about Bangladesh with other countries around the world, and you'll see that I think we have got the balance broadly right. And we do look at it every day. I mean, the travel advice is considered every day and updated very often.
So my question is, at the very
efficiently, we meet our deadlines in terms of targets, and we issue to 70% of the people who apply. And I think a sort of proof of the pudding in this is that the number of people applying and travelling from Bangladesh to the UK is steadily increasing. And I'm very keen for legitimate travellers to have the opportunity to come to the UK, to visit family, see all the things that the UK has to offer. And I think when I compare the visa service that we offer now in Dhaka with some of the sort of visa services that I've seen being offered elsewhere at different stages of my career, I think we offer a very good service.
Thank you, Shanti.
For giving me the opportunity. So you may have known from the media reports that Bangladesh High Court already have ordered Pran Group to withdraw their many products from the market. Some items are widely available in the UK cash and carry service. We haven't seen any UK authority to do anything about it. Do you not think that you have the responsibility to do something about this decision?
Products that have been banned from Bangladesh on health and safety grounds?
Yeah, and
They're coming here.
selling here.
Yeah. Well, I think that, that would be
Withdraw from market. It's a very big for the life.
right.
Quite few.
It's quite few. There's a lot of
Okay, well look, let me take that one offline and we'll follow up.
Brexit scenario of UK Bangladesh trade and commerce.
Continue regardless of where we end up on Brexit. Clearly that's a highly political question at the moment, and as you all know better than me, we're going through the process of choosing a new Prime Minister, and the new Prime Minister will then have an urgent need to take forward a policy on Brexit. But I think if you look at all the things that we do with Bangladesh, then those, broadly speaking, will continue wherever we end up in our relationship between ourselves and the European Union. There will be some specific issues around tariffs on garments where there will need to be some transitional arrangements put in place very quickly, but we are aware of that. And obviously, until we know exactly where we end up with Europe, then the sort of second order effect, which includes Bangladeshi garment tariffs and preferences, can't be addressed. So there will be a quick piece of footwork to be done once the sort of shape of our future relationship with Europe is known. But more generally, I mean, the sort of political development, climate, Rohingyas, all of the things that we work on with Bangladesh are more or less separate from our relationship with the European Union, and I think will continue as they are at the moment.
Issue which I think is important to everyone in this room. We have been hearing about the understaffing of NHS these days, and there are hundreds of overseas doctors, including from Bangladesh. They are planning to leave NHS. Why? Because to work in this country, to stay in this country, they have to pay thousands of pounds for the visa fees and for the healthcare. So I was talking to one of my Bangladeshi colleagues, and he said that he's going to leave soon because if he wants to stay and work in this country, he has to pay something like £7,000 because that includes the visa fees for the next 3 years, and for the healthcare payments for his wife, his 4 children. So it's, I mean, we are talking about the professionals, highly skilled people. I mean, the immigration rule cannot expect them to keep on fighting to live in this country. So what I have been noticing that for the past, the last more than a decade, once the Tier 2 has been abolished, as actually when we came, it was like under permitted development. The doctors and nurses, I'm not sure about the nurses, but the doctors definitely were under permitted development. Then the Tier 2, and then they had a cap, and then last year I think they have lifted the cap, and now they're allowing the doctors, probably because Britain is coming out of EU. But the thing is, this is, I think this expensive, the immigration rule is because of this. It is already we have the problem in NHS and the loss of A&D, accident and emergency are closing down, the hospitals are closing down. So I think this whole immigration issues is complicating more the NHS. And since we have that, we know that the Trump he wants the NHS issue on the table. So all these things, I mean, don't you think that British government should be more, the government should make it more easy for the overseas doctors?
I mean, I think these are all highly, questions about the NHS and migration policy are highly relevant in the current political environment. I mean, I can't really comment on them. The only thing I would suggest is that there are people in government who are looking very urgently at these questions, and what I would suggest is that people who are concerned about them, including particularly people working within the NHS, do everything that they can to make sure that their views are reflected in the consultations that are going on at the moment. That seems to me to be the only thing I can really suggest. I mean, it's, as I said, these go a bit beyond my specific role in UK-Bangladesh relations, but they're highly political, and there is a lot of work going on at the moment, so please make sure the voices are heard in that political consultation.
Thank you.
High Commission is reluctant to help come forward when someone is a British citizen and Bangladeshi citizen involved with Bangladeshi internal issues. British High Commission is reluctant to help. But when you see Nazdin Zakaria in Iran, so many things happening, and we can see prime minister level, they're fighting, they are arguing, they're even sometimes say 400 something million that they're going to pay to release Nazdin Zakaria. Why what is the specific British role regarding dual citizen when they're in their own country facing problems?
If they're in their country of their other nationality, we wouldn't normally have a consular responsibility for them. Now, clearly, if there's a sort of particular circumstances which definitely apply in the case of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, but would also apply sometimes in the case of people, British Bangladeshis in Bangladesh. And if there are cases where we feel that there are particular concerns, then we have the right to raise them. But as a normal consular practice everywhere around the world, we do not normally offer people help in the way that we would people who were in countries where they didn't have that national connection.
Why different in terms of Nazdin Zakaria?
Because this is a very high-profile case where we think that she's being, as the Foreign Secretary has made very clear, we think it's an outrageous abuse that she's being held for the last 3 years. And if there was an equivalent case in Bangladesh, then I've absolutely no doubt that we would be raising that sort of case. And indeed, we have quite often, where there have been cases where we have particular concerns, we have raised them with the Bangladeshi authorities. So it's not unique to the Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe case, but as I said, the normal practice around the world is that if people are in the country of their other nationality, then we wouldn't normally, as a matter of practice, and particularly if they get involved in sort of what you might term domestic legal issues, then we don't normally involve ourselves.
Yeah, well,
it's quite a large number, actually. I mean, I haven't got the exact figure, but we are involved in forced marriage is a very major issue for us. We take forced marriage extremely seriously, and those are cases where we intervene. And I haven't got the exact figures, but I would estimate that it's in the sort of low hundreds, very low hundreds, around 100 and something most years. And so we do have a regular involvement with these cases, which are obviously extremely, they're a very flagrant abuse of the rights of the people involved, and so we act in the way that I mentioned. Where there is a case that we have particular concerns, then we act.
Thank you.
But your interest of the diaspora and of the 2021 as well. There's something else that is coming in 2020. Bangladeshis throughout the world will be celebrating the birth centenary of the founding president of the country, Bangabandhu. and social organizations and cultural organizations. I now wearing my cultural activist hat. You would see that there will be so many events taking place even in the UK by the Bangladeshi diaspora, and guests will be coming from Bangladesh. You just heard from various people about the problems with visa, and you said that 70% are being reported. But in that particular case, can you see that, and can you give us an assurance that the full cooperation from the High Commission when people are coming for the 2020 events that will be organized by the Bangladeshi diaspora here?
Happy to see that organisations will be choosing to celebrate this in their own way. If people want to come to the UK, then they can apply for visas, and the visas will be looked at in the same way as they always are. I don't think we'll be doing direct facilitation around that event, but as I said, we have a service which is efficient and dispassionate in looking at making sure that the rules are applied so that people who are eligible to travel can travel, and people who, for some reason, are not eligible to travel or represent a risk don't travel. And we'll be applying those rules in the same way. But it's useful to know if there is going to be a surge in demand. It's obviously useful for us to know about that so that we can put things in place to enable the system to continue to function efficiently, which is what we've done for the World Cup, because that obviously produced quite an increase in quite a spike in demand, and I think we have managed to service that quite efficiently.
Well, the two announcements.
So experts say climate change is happening mostly due to Western world excessive carbon emission, air pollution, and industrialization, and all other causes. So my question to you: what is the UK government is doing to reduce the carbon footprint of the UK citizens, and how is UK is helping Bangladesh to cope climate change and protect their citizens to become a climate refugee? Thank you.
Announcements by the UK government about becoming carbon neutral by, is it 2040? It's quite soon, 2050. So, I mean, I think we, more than almost any other government, I mean, if you look at the facts on what we've done on our carbon footprint over the last 20 years, I mean, it's a remarkable achievement. And there are days now, quite frequently in the UK, when more than half of our energy is generated from non-carbon producing sources. So, more than any other country, I think we've really taken the lead in terms of what we do. And as I said, we've now got very ambitious targets to, in the next 30 years, to move beyond carbon completely. So I think we're taking our responsibilities, given that we do, of course, as an early industrialiser, probably the earliest industrialiser in the world. We obviously have played a part in the development of the problem. In terms of what we're doing with Bangladesh, I mean, the most sort of tactical example, or the nearest term example, is that there is a resilience strand, which a small number of countries, which includes the UK, Netherlands and Bangladesh, are working on together for the climate summit that's taking place at the UN General Assembly this September. So we're working with Bangladesh on that, and I hope that out of that is going to come a wider programme of work, because climate change is being tackled across the board in all sorts of ways by trying to reduce the amount of carbon we put in the atmosphere on the one hand, but also trying to increase the resilience of countries who are going to be affected by climate change, among which Bangladesh is clearly right at the front of the queue. So,
Rohingya issue there in Bangladesh?
well, we're doing two things on that. It's to try to create a situation where the Rohingya can return in conditions of safety and dignity, and it has to be voluntary, of course, like all refugee returns. I think it's fair to say that we recognise that the conditions in Rakhine are not right at the moment for refugees to return, and that's probably not going to change in the near term, although it's very important that the political pressure is maintained on Myanmar. We've done more than anyone else, I think, particularly in the UN Security Council, where we're what's called the pen holder. So we're really still gripping this dossier, and I was in a meeting this morning, actually, in the Foreign Office, where we were reminded again that this is a real priority for the Foreign Secretary. So on the political side, we're continuing to do that. I'm very pleased that Sheikh Hasina is going to China next week, because I actually think the country that can probably make the biggest difference is China. So it's good that the Prime Minister of Bangladesh is going to be engaging directly with the Chinese authorities on that. The other thing that we're doing is we have so far provided £129 million of humanitarian assistance to the Rohingya, because I visited the camps myself on a couple of occasions, and it is really shocking to see the conditions in which people are living in the camps. I mean, the Rohingyas, it's very difficult for the Rohingyas, it's also very difficult for the host community in Cox's Bazar. I mean, if you're a community of 350,000 and 1 million people suddenly appear and live in what was your forest, it's obviously it's a very significant problem. So we are working very hard with, as I said, 129 million of British taxpayers' money with the international humanitarian effort to make sure that the needs of the Rohingyas and the needs of the host community are properly addressed. And I would expect
About human rights.
we have made clear to the government our concerns about some of the sort of political rights that we see not necessarily being fully upheld. And there are aspects, for example, of the way that the war on drugs has been taken forward in Bangladesh, which also causes concern. And we have a regular dialogue with the government about the issues that worry us.
Thank you.
It is near future. British visa processing center come to Dhaka.
Yes.
You get visa processing center is from Delhi.
Sir, if you don't answer, we don't mind. Okay. Do you think democracy in Bangladesh is in the right track? If not, do the British government has any advice on this? And then related one, as UK High Commissioner to Bangladesh, do you think that their people have freedom of speech? Because already you mentioned the press freedom, but freedom of speech in Bangladesh PM Sheikh Hasina claimed. And third one, not question, not necessary to answer it. There's a World Cup cricket in here. Lots of Bangladeshis are not taking the visas and not coming. But anyway, that's number 4 is England, number 5 is Bangladesh. One of them get through to the semi-final. So, what team is support and which is happy? England or Bangladesh go through to the semi-final?
Democracy, our human rights report makes this clear, and we have regular discussions about that and about issues including freedom of speech and media freedom. So I think there's definitely areas where we have some concerns, but also, as I said, there is some positive things to work with as well, and we're trying to encourage the positive and make clear our concerns about the negative. On your last question, I mean, we were lucky enough to have the Tigers at our Queen's birthday party, which was a huge privilege. They're delightful young men. I have to say they're brilliant at handling their millions of supporters. They had an enormous number of selfies taken with them. I'm very glad they've done as well as they have in the competition. I said at the time that I would support Bangladesh in every single match, except the ones where they were playing England. So I was very keen they won against the West Indies. I was very keen they won against South Africa. I was very keen they beat Afghanistan, even though I used to be in Afghanistan, and I hugely admire the role of the Afghan cricket team in producing national unity in that unhappy country. I think what I said is that if it did end up with a Bangladesh-England final, my only hope would be that the best team would win, and that it would be a good match conducted in a sporting atmosphere with great cricket. And I think that remains my carefully neutral diplomatic answer to that difficult question.
And on that diplomatic answer, we've only got 5 minutes. We're going to have to wrap up very shortly. So if we can press through the questions.
30 seconds,
Bangladesh every year. So how much aid going to Bangladesh from UK government? There is allegations and we have information about the
problem. As a British High Commissioner, how you can help them?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Everyone asking the question, and I was trying to answer the question.
Compliments.
Surprisingly, nobody was asking the question about Rohingya. When I took my hand up, Mr. Khan already asked the question, so I got the answer. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Priority one, you are lobbying to solve for the Bangladesh. Top priority.
We have also our
to emphasize on the relationship. I know that following Brexit, we are redesigning and re-emphasizing our relationship with the Commonwealth countries and focusing more there. More you can contribute.
Great. A successful one over the years, and I think we have been a relatively small part of the extraordinary development success that Bangladesh has enjoyed. And if you look at the numbers, Bangladesh is almost the textbook example of how aid can be used well by a government. I mean, regardless of issues that one might have with some of the issues around governance in Bangladesh, I think you can really admire the way in which successive governments of different political parties have used international assistance to really improve the lot of the people in Bangladesh, particularly the poorest people. And I think it's been incredibly impressive, and the result of that is that Bangladesh still has a lot of poor people, but has a lot fewer than it used to, and is about to graduate from least developed to middle income country status. At the moment we give about £180 million a year to Bangladesh, so it's a very large programme. And we are in the process at the moment of looking at how we will redesign our aid as Bangladesh ceases to be an LDC and becomes an MIC. And I think what's likely to happen is that we'll give less on-budget support in areas like health, education, the sort of basics, and we'll focus more on technical advice and technical assistance in areas like governance, ease of doing business, economic reform, because that tends to be the way in which the aid relationship, development relationship changes as countries become richer. And as I say, Bangladesh has been a stunning success in that sense, and I think we'll want to sort of take the lessons that we've learned elsewhere from countries elsewhere in the world that have gone through a similar transition. I mean, on the question of how the aid is used, I mean, DFID, Department for International Development, are world class at this. I mean, I certainly can't claim that no pound spent by DFID is ever not, but I think DFID is about the best in class at making sure that aid is used effectively. And the sort of NGOs, and I've seen quite a lot of the DFID programs already just in the short time I've been in Bangladesh, and I think the work that they're doing alongside organisations like BRAC is really impressive. And I think DFID are very, very good at making sure that the aid is spent as effectively as possible, but of course the price of that is eternal vigilance. So I think it's a good programme, it's going to evolve, and we're in the process of designing that. On students, anything to do with students and people-to-people and cultural relationships is handled by my brilliant colleagues in the British Council, who have a sort of semi-detached relationship with government. They actually operate from a site downtown alongside Dhaka University, where they've been since 1951, and they're an absolutely sort of core part of the sort of wider education, cultural world in Dhaka. I think they do enormously impressive work, and I think anything relating to sort of internships, British Bangladeshis want to contribute back in Bangladesh, those are really issues for the council, and the council I think runs some brilliant programs, so that's where I would sort of tend to suggest people should look on those sort of issues. And finally, you mentioned the Commonwealth. I should have mentioned the Commonwealth earlier in my talk. Commonwealth partnership between the UK and Bangladesh is very important. There's a lot of work going on in HMG at the moment in the British government to look at how, as we become global Britain post-Brexit, we can make more use of the Commonwealth. We had the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in London last year, which was very successful and helped to sort of give a bit more energy to the Commonwealth. The next Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting is going to be next year in Rwanda, and I very much hope that Bangladesh will be an enthusiastic participant in that, as it has been in the Commonwealth since Bangladesh became independent in 1971. So I think quite right to raise it, and it's an important part of the wider partnership that we enjoy with Bangladesh. There was one final point, on help. I mean, we will help people, as I said. We don't get involved in sort of disputes around family, land, money, those things. I mean, those are not issues that the British government can get directly involved with. As I said in answer to an earlier question, we do get involved where people are in sort of exceptionally difficult circumstances, which occasionally happens in Bangladesh, but not very often, where there is a sort of genuine consular role for dual nationals. But I mean, I think we need to be very clear with people so that expectations are clear, that if people go back to Bangladesh and have issues with their family over money or inheritance or land, those are things that need to be sorted out within the Bangladeshi system, because we as the British government can't get directly involved in those.
I have a thing that the aid money given to Bangladesh for holding good election, or better election, when well spent, that money?
I think we can all debate where the elections ended up. I mean, clearly, I think it's probably better to have tried to support good elections than not to have supported them at all. And I think, clearly, supporting democracy in Bangladesh, as I've said multiple times during the last hour and a bit, is going to be a really important priority continuing. And I think it's actually something we'll be doing more of as we redefine our programs to work with a middle-income partner rather than a least developed partner.
I'm here, guys. Look in here. 1, 2, 3. One more. Look in here. Another one. One more. Thank you very much. 1, 2, 3. Everyone look in here, please. 1, 2, 3. Another one. One more.
Photographs outside of the office.
Yeah.